You ever notice how the enemy doesn't always show up dressed like an enemy? Sometimes it walks in smiling. Sometimes it talks real sweet. Sometimes it knows just the right thing to say to get under your skin. And if you're not grounded, if you're not settled in who you are, it'll make you think the battle is about proving yourself, about fighting fire with fire. But smart people, those who have been refined by storms, who have walked through betrayal and still kept their head held high, they know better. They've learned that chaos only multiplies when you feed it. When someone toxic comes at you, it's never really about you. They don't see you, they see a mirror, and when you reflect back to them what they refuse to fix in themselves, it makes them uncomfortable. Their chaos, their criticism, their manipulation, it's not personal. It's a cry from a soul that's been mishandled and never took the time to heal. But that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is your peace, your calling, your character. Smart people don't argue with foolishness. They don't raise their voice to match dysfunction, because the moment you descend into that noise, you become part of it. And we weren't called to be echoes of brokenness. We were called to be voices of clarity. They don't waste breath trying to change someone who's committed to misunderstanding them. They don't throw pearls to pigs hoping they'll be appreciated. They know silence can speak louder than shouting. And distance sometimes is the loudest boundary of all. It's not that smart people don't feel anger or frustration. They do, but they've learned that emotion is a poor decision maker. Just because someone throws a jab doesn't mean you need to throw one back. Just because they try to trigger you doesn't mean you have to dance to their dysfunction. There is power in restraint. Power in pausing before you speak, power in choosing wisdom over ego. See, there was a time when you might have clapped back, when you thought standing your ground meant matching disrespect with disrespect, but growth changes your fight. Maturity will show you that peace isn't passive, it's strategic. Choosing to be unbothered is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's understanding that not every invitation to a battle deserves your RSVP, especially not when the cost is your peace, your joy, your alignment. The thing about toxic people is that they thrive on reaction, they feed on chaos, they want you flustered, confused, second, guessing your worth. So when you stop feeding them, when you show up calm, grounded, and clear, they lose access. They may still try, but you're not playing anymore. That's what smart people do. They stop playing games they never agreed to. They choose their peace like it's their paycheck. Because it is. Your peace is your currency in this world, and every time you trade it for drama, you go bankrupt in your spirit. You don't need to scream that you've changed. Just live like you have. You don't need to defend your growth to people who still see you through the lens of your past. Smart people let their fruit speak for them. Let their consistency preach louder than their clapbacks ever could. Let their peace be their protest. You know who you are, and if you don't, you better find out before someone else tries to define it for you. And here's the truth. Nobody tells you sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all, just sitting in your stillness. Letting God fight battles your words could never win. Letting people talk while you walk. Letting the noise exist, but refusing to let it in. That's not being fake, that's being focused. So if you're facing someone toxic, someone who tests your patience, someone who thinks your silence is weakness, they don't even know what kind of strength they're standing in front of. Because it takes more power to stand still than it does to swing, more wisdom to walk away than to stay and war, and more courage to protect your peace than to prove your point. Let them talk, let them twist, let them try. But you stay grounded, because smart people don't match chaos with chaos. They rise above it. There comes a moment in your life when you stop apologizing for protecting what God gave you. When you wake up and realize that not everyone is entitled to access you, that being kind doesn't mean being walked on. That having a soft heart doesn't mean you let people trample it just to feel seen. Smart people know that, and they don't just talk boundaries, they live them. See, toxic people don't always come in with a warning label. Sometimes they wear a smile, sometimes they come dressed as loyalty, sometimes they sound like support until you say no. And that's when the truth starts to show. That's when the guilt trips start. That's when the manipulation creeps in. And if you're not rooted in your worth, you'll find yourself constantly shrinking to keep the peace. But smart people don't shrink. They expand in truth, and they draw lines that protect their growth. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity, and clarity is a form of love. Love for yourself, love for your calling, love for your healing. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that bleeds just to make them comfortable. That's not selflessness, that's self-abandonment. Smart people know the difference. There's this lie the world tries to sell you, that if you say no, you're being difficult. That if you prioritize your peace, you're being selfish. But let me tell you something. Smart people got tired of being everything for everyone and nothing for themselves. They stopped explaining their choices to people who never had to carry the weight of them. They stopped letting guilt sit at the table when discernment was trying to take its place. You don't have to be harsh to be holy. You don't have to yell to be heard, but you do have to be clear. Because unclear boundaries become open doors for repeated wounds, and smart people don't just forgive, they learn. They learn that saying, "I don't have space for this," isn't rejection, it's self-respect. They learn that "I won't tolerate that" doesn't mean you don't love someone. It means you finally started loving yourself. Some people won't like it when you grow. They won't clap when you level up, because the version of you that tolerated their mess made them feel powerful. But when you start speaking up, when you start saying no more, when you start showing up for yourself the way you always showed up for them, watch how quick they switch. Watch how they call you selfish, ungrateful, even fake. But smart people don't chase after understanding from those committed to confusion. They don't defend their boundaries to those who benefited from them not having any. They just enforce them and keep moving. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, so every time you say it's okay, when it's not okay, you're rewriting your value in someone else's eyes. Smart people don't let that happen anymore. They stopped choosing peace that costs them their own. They started asking themselves, if I keep saying yes to them, what am I saying no to in me? There's a sacredness in your space, in your mind, in your energy, and when you allow people to enter it unchecked, they track in dirt from battles you were never meant to fight. Smart people clean house, not out of bitterness, but out of obedience to their growth. They understand that everybody can't go where they're going. And that doesn't make them arrogant, it makes them intentional. Don't let fear of being alone keep you in company that drains you. Don't let history convince you to ignore the reality of what's happening now. Just because someone was there for your past doesn't mean they have the maturity for your future. Smart people discern the difference. They hold gratitude and boundaries in the same breath. Thankful for the role someone played, but firm enough to say, this is where your chapter ends. And they do it without guilt, without over-explaining, without bending over backwards to soften the truth. Because they know that real love respects boundaries, real loyalty honors your growth, real connection doesn't demand you to betray yourself to keep it alive. So, if you're learning how to set boundaries, don't let the noise distract you. You're not being rude. You're being responsible. You're not distancing out of hate. You're healing. You're finally choosing you in a world that trained you to put yourself last. Smart people set boundaries without apologizing because peace, purpose, and self-respect are worth protecting. There's a shift that happens in your life when you stop letting other people's brokenness tell you who you are. A shift that silences the noise and teaches you how to look at someone's toxic behavior and say, that's not mine to carry. Smart people get there. not because they are perfect, but because they've been through enough to know better. They don't take toxic behavior personally because they've learned that people throw what's inside them, not what's inside you. Some people are fighting wars you can't see, wars they never dealt with, pain they never unpacked, trauma they never acknowledged. So they bleed on anyone who gets close enough, and if you're not careful, you'll take that bleeding personally. You'll think it's about your worth, your value, your voice, but smart people, they don't internalize projection. They recognize it. They pause and say, "This isn't about me. This is a reflection of them." It takes strength to do that. It takes healing. Because when you've been wounded before, when you've lived a life where people misused your kindness, talked about you behind your back, twisted your intentions, it's easy to believe that every jab is a sign you're not enough. But that's a lie, and smart people stop agreeing with lies. They stop giving weight to words that weren't rooted in truth. They stop letting insecurity masquerading as authority define how they see themselves. Someone calling you too much doesn't mean you are. Someone calling you selfish for setting boundaries doesn't mean you are. Someone trying to tear you down doesn't mean you don't deserve to be standing tall. Smart people see through that, because here's what they understand. When people are toxic, they aren't looking for truth. They're looking for control. They use shame, they use silence, they use guilt, but smart people don't absorb that anymore. They filter it. They ask, does this align with who I know I am? Or is this someone else's pain, fear, or insecurity showing up in disguise? You've got to know yourself, really know yourself, to not take it personally. Otherwise, the world will toss you back and forth, and every negative word will plant itself like a seed. But smart people weed their garden. They say, that comment doesn't get to grow here, that tone doesn't get to echo in my spirit, that attitude doesn't belong in my atmosphere. They've learned not to be reactive because reacting gives power, and when someone's aim is to get under your skin, your reaction becomes their reward. But smart people don't hand out rewards to chaos. They stay grounded. They breathe before they respond. Sometimes they don't respond at all, not because they're weak, but because they've chosen peace over performance. Not everything that's said deserves an answer. Not every accusation needs a defense. Some things are so far from the truth that even addressing them gives them more weight than they ever deserved. Smart people walk away not because they're afraid, but because they've grown, because they've seen what it costs to internalize the poison someone else is trying to hand them. You don't have to drink from every cup handed to you, especially not if it's filled with bitterness. You don't have to carry every label thrown at you, especially not if it doesn't reflect the truth of who you've become. And you don't have to stay in rooms that dishonor your presence just because your absence would be questioned. Smart people don't beg to belong. They don't shrink to fit someone else's comfort. They don't contort to be palatable for people who still haven't dealt with their own bitterness. Toxic people are mirrors. They reflect what's inside, but smart people are windows. They let the light in. They don't mirror back dysfunction. They don't respond with the same energy. They rise above it. They stay rooted in truth, in clarity, in discernment. And that doesn't mean they don't feel hurt. It means they've learned not to let the hurt redefine them. You're not what they did to you. You're not what they said about you. You're not the story they tried to write with your name in it. Smart people take the pen back. They write their own chapters. They refuse to live in narratives created by people who never even bothered to know their heart. So the next time someone throws shade, manipulates your kindness, or tries to convince you that you're the problem, take a breath. Ask yourself, is this really about me? And if the answer is no, you leave it right there, at their feet, not in your spirit. Because smart people don't take toxic behavior personally. They see it for what it is and they choose peace anyway. There's a kind of strength that doesn't always get celebrated, the kind that walks away not because it's bitter, but because it finally sees clearly. The kind that chooses distance over dysfunction, the kind that doesn't need fireworks or explanations, just a quiet decision in the soul that says, I deserve better than this. Smart people know what that feels like. They don't wait for the perfect goodbye. They don't hold out for an apology that may never come. They walk away without needing closure because they've learned to close the door themselves. You see, waiting for closure can become a trap. It sounds noble, it sounds fair, but sometimes closure is just another word for control, a desire to tie things up neatly, to make sense of something that was never supposed to make sense. But toxic people rarely give you what you're looking for. They leave you hanging, doubting, second-guessing. They keep you tangled in cycles that confuse your spirit and cloud your vision. And if you're not careful, you'll stay stuck waiting for peace from someone who only ever brought chaos. Smart people stop waiting. They realize closure isn't something they get from others, it's something they give to themselves. It's a choice, a line drawn, a whispered enough in the dark when no one else hears it but you and God. And that moment becomes holy, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. Sometimes you've got to walk away still bleeding, still wondering, still trying to make sense of the pieces, but you walk anyway. You gather what's left of your strength, you straighten your back, and you move forward not because you're ready, but because staying would cost too much. There's a version of you on the other side of that goodbye who's waiting to breathe again. But you won't meet them if you stay stuck trying to get answers from someone who only ever offered confusion. Smart people learn that peace doesn't always come with explanation. Sometimes it comes in the letting go, the release, the surrender of needing to understand everything. You don't need them to validate your hurt. You don't need them to explain why they changed, why they lied, why they used your heart like a doormat. You don't need them to suddenly become someone they never were. What you need is to trust yourself. Trust that walking away is not a failure, it's freedom. Trust that healing can begin even with loose ends. Even with silence, even with no reply, and it takes guts. It takes a different kind of faith to say, I don't know why they did it, but I won't let it live inside me anymore. To stop rehearsing conversations in your head, to stop scrolling, checking, wondering, to stop hoping they'll wake up and finally see your worth. Smart people don't beg to be seen. They recognize that if someone couldn't handle their light, it's not their job to dim it. It's their job to move. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe them continued access just because they once had it. History isn't a reason to stay bound. Loyalty to pain isn't a virtue, and smart people know when to break the agreement they made with heartbreak. The agreement that said, if I just hold on long enough, maybe it'll fix itself. No, some things don't fix. Some people don't change, and some chapters need to end for the story to move forward. They walk away not with resentment, but with release. Not because they didn't care, but because they finally cared enough about themselves. And when they do, they don't look back with anger. They look back with wisdom. Gratitude for the lesson, clarity in the journey, and peace, deep peace in the choice. Sometimes you'll never hear I'm sorry. You'll never get the truth. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve healing. It just means your healing has to come from a deeper place. A place that says, even without the closure I thought I needed, I'm still choosing to be whole. You're not walking away because you're weak. You're walking away because you're finally strong enough to stop dancing for someone who never had the rhythm for your soul. You're not leaving because you gave up, you're leaving because you woke up. Because smart people don't wait for toxic people to give them closure. They give it to themselves, and they keep walking forward. There's a certain kind of power that doesn't make a sound. It doesn't throw shade, it doesn't clap back, it doesn't chase after revenge, it just stands still, calm, composed, and confident in its truth. That's how smart people handle toxic behavior. They don't get petty, they get purposeful, they know who they are, and they refuse to let someone else's dysfunction drag them out of character. Because when you really know your worth, you stop reacting to every bit of noise trying to pull you off your path. See, when someone is trying to provoke you, they don't care about peace, they care about power. They want to control your mood. They want to steal your focus. They want to shift the attention off their chaos and onto your reaction. But smart people don't hand over that kind of power. They understand that not every disrespect deserves a demonstration. Not every insult deserves a response. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is silence. It takes maturity to realize that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Anyone can react. Anyone can fire off a message, make a scene, or air things out in front of an audience. But smart people take a breath. They step back. They look beyond the moment and ask themselves, what does this cost me? What does this reaction serve? Because they know that pettiness might feel good for a second, but purpose builds peace that lasts. You've got to reach a place where you're no longer triggered by small minds and loud mouths. Where you recognize that sometimes the enemy will disguise itself as opportunity to argue, to defend, to explain. But smart people stop performing for people who never cared to understand them in the first place. They conserve their energy for what actually matters. They use their words to build, not to break. They use their silence not as weakness, but as wisdom. Because silence, when rooted in strength, speaks volumes. There's a difference between being quiet because you're scared and being quiet because you're solid. Smart people choose the second. They know they're not avoiding the fight. They're choosing the battlefield. They're not ignoring what happened. They're refusing to let it define them. You don't have to match someone's low just to prove you're right. You can stand tall in truth and still keep your grace intact. You can honor your emotions without making a scene. You can walk away with dignity and still be heard. When you move with purpose, you become hard to shake. Because people can sense it when you're no longer available for the chaos. They can feel it when you've made up your mind that your peace is non-negotiable. You don't have to shout that you've grown. Your discipline will show it. Your restraint will reveal it. Your ability to remain calm while everything around you tries to provoke you. That's your power. Some people live for the reaction. They live for the drama. They feed off your frustration because it makes them feel important. But when you stop giving them a stage, they lose their spotlight. When you stop replying, stop defending, stop explaining, you take the fuel out of their fire. And that's when your strength starts speaking louder than your words ever could. It's not about pretending to be unbothered. It's about deciding that your peace matters more than your pride. That your purpose matters more than proving a point. That your future can't be delayed by someone who doesn't even know how to heal. Smart people choose that kind of perspective. They know that growth doesn't always look like action. It often looks like pause. Reflection, discernment, walking away before they say something they'll regret. Choosing not to respond when they know it won't lead anywhere healthy. You don't have to be the loudest in the room to be the strongest. You don't have to stoop low to remind someone who you are. Sometimes your stillness will say more than your words. Sometimes your peace is the protest. Sometimes your silence is the sermon. And smart people live in that space. They don't move unless it's meaningful. So the next time someone tries to draw you into a storm, remember who you are. Remember what you've worked for. Remember that you didn't survive everything you've been through just to lose yourself over one moment of madness. Stay grounded, stay focused, stay above it, because smart people respond with purpose, not pettiness, and that's where their power lies. There's something sacred about a person who's been through the fire and still chooses to walk with grace. Someone who's tasted betrayal, abandonment, manipulation, and instead of letting it turn them bitter, they let it shape them wiser. Smart people don't just survive toxic people, they heal. And what makes them truly powerful is that once they've done the work, once they've stitched themselves back together in the dark, they turn around and help somebody else find their light too. Healing isn't pretty, it's not wrapped in clean timelines or polished words, it's messy, it's raw, it's nights of crying when nobody sees you. It's forgiving people who never apologized. It's deciding, day after day, not to let what broke you become what defines you. And smart people, they commit to that process. They don't skip it. They don't numb it. They lean into it because they know the only way out is through. But they don't stop there, because real healing doesn't just want peace for itself, it wants peace for others too. It says, if I can come out of this, maybe someone else can too. So they start to speak differently. They begin to walk differently. They stop repeating the cycles that tried to consume them, and without even realizing it, they start building bridges for other people to walk across. That's what smart people do. They heal, then they help others heal. They're not perfect. They're not trying to be. But they know pain, and they recognize it in someone else's eyes. So when they speak, they don't speak from judgment. They speak from experience. They know what it's like to feel stuck, silenced, ashamed, and because of that, their presence becomes a place of safety. They become the kind of person they once needed, the one who won't dismiss your pain, the one who doesn't rush your process. The one who reminds you that healing is possible, even when it doesn't feel like it. Smart people have been through enough to know that everyone's fighting something. So they carry a softness with them, a compassion that isn't loud, but you feel it. You feel it in the way they listen, in the way they love, in the way they say, you don't have to stay broken just because someone else was. That's the kind of wisdom that only comes from walking through some things and coming out with your soul still intact. And no, they don't go back to toxic people just to prove they've healed, but they don't carry hate either. They release it. They understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing the behavior. It's about releasing the hold it had on their spirit. Because holding on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. Smart people don't have time for that. They're too busy growing, too busy building, too busy breaking chains and lifting others up along the way. They don't just set boundaries, they teach others how to set them too. They don't just protect their peace, they create space for others to find theirs. They don't just preach strength, they embody it with gentleness, with honesty, with transparency. They say, I've been where you are and I'm still here, so you don't have to give up now. There's a power in that, a power in turning your wounds into wisdom, in allowing your scars to be reminders, not shame. In choosing to walk forward even with the limp, smart people embrace that walk and they make it count, not just for themselves but for everyone who comes behind them. Sometimes helping others heal isn't about saying the right thing. Sometimes it's just showing up, just being present. Just living in a way that makes healing look possible. You never know who's watching you, who's learning from your silence, who's being strengthened by your survival. You never know how your breakthrough might be someone else's blueprint. That's why smart people don't hide their journey, they honor it. They understand that the healing wasn't just for them. It was so they could be light for someone else still stuck in the dark. It's not about being the hero. It's about being honest. It's about letting others know they're not alone, that they're seen, that they're worthy, and that even after the worst pain, there is still purpose. Because smart people heal, then help others heal, and that's how they change the world.